the segment of the show, The Editor's Choice. This is a segment where we look at the stories that have made the Sunday papers and what we can expect in the week that we are looking to. Joining me for this discussion, we're joined by William Bird. He is from Media Monitoring Africa, and in studio, I have our senior reporter, Tumaole Mohlaoli, who is going to help us look at some of the papers, or stories, I should say, that have made the front pages of the newspapers. Tumaole, let me start in studio here. I don't think it's a surprise that both the City Press and the Sunday Times newspapers, they are running with the DA story. The mess that was their election posters in Phoenix, the party's leaders, at least in KwaZulu-Natal, apologizing, but it looks like John Steenhuisen is very clear that he is not going to do that. He's not going to issue an apology because he believes that the people that stood guard, whether it be at their shops or anywhere else during the July unrest, they are heroes, except that they made a mess of this messaging in Phoenix. Give us the context as to why, because you were on the ground.
That's right. When
this was happening back in July. You were, in part, in Phoenix along the various many areas that you visited.
Yes, and what we found in July, Xoli, in Phoenix and very many areas, but when we look at Phoenix specifically, is the issue that it seemed as if those reprisals or the defense of the community was racially motivated. There seems that there was racial profiling, and those that were killed subsequent to the breakout of the so-called civil unrest and looting riots were specifically targeted as black people. Now, the community of Phoenix has since come out, and even subsequently to that, to hold various, community building initiatives and various peace marches and peace initiatives to say it wasn't racially motivated. But when you look at it, Xoli, 15 people were killed by armed community members, majority of them being people of African descent. So it raises the question, what actually happened? We actually even saw senior government leaders, including senior ANC officials, members of the NEC, Gwede Mantashe, went out there to try and send a message to say, please, let us talk about unity and let us put this behind us, because this issue of racial division is a highly, highly, highly charged issue in Phoenix.
William, let's bring you into the conversation. It's worth mentioning that in total, just in Phoenix alone, 36 people died. The majority of those, or let me be specific with the numbers as well, what we have been told by authorities is that 30 of those were black people. 3 of the people who died were of Indian descent. Now, in your view, having heard these stats, is the DA missing an opportunity here to apologize at the level of John Steenhuisen in order for their campaign to not be overshadowed by this particular incident?
So look, I think the first thing is that the moment you kind of say, well, 3 died, this is the other 30, that doesn't help us, and it doesn't advance understanding for what it means to be in a democracy. And it doesn't help us unpack racism, which is clearly alive and well, and which unambiguously and clearly was a feature of some of the violence that went down. Like, to deny that, I think, is to deny the people that did die in those circumstances their dignity and death. And I think that that's fundamentally wrong, especially given the history of racism in South Africa, that we know racism is alive and well. In that context, then, to be going and saying, we're not saying you guys that are the racists are heroes, but you other guys are the heroes. Like, that's just, it just, I mean, it beggars belief that they would have been so fundamentally out of touch with the feelings in that particular community and the sense of what went down and the sensitivities and the efforts in that community to try and rebuild bridges. Because bear in mind, you don't need everyone in Phoenix to be racist. You just need a handful of people to be racist for the entire community to be deeply, profoundly tainted, and for there to then be a long road to kind of rebuilding, reestablishing trust, making sure that you can start to, build those bridges again. And in that context, to then come into that and just say, well, this is the case, and then to say, well, we're not going to apologize for that. I think it's a denial of South Africa's reality and a denial of the events that went down. But that's the call for the DA to make, and then for the public to decide if they accept that and if they want to vote for that for that party.
Yeah, Tumaole, before we move on from this issue, the DA, they seem to be harping on this word misinterpretation. Now, I'm not sure what misinterpretation means if you're going to take these posters in a community that had such an experience, and you paint the ones as heroes, and you say the ANC, on the other hand, was trying to divide you racially or call you racists. I'm trying to look at this dispassionately to say, if the DA had mounted these posters, not just in Phoenix, and say, perhaps outside Maponya Mall in Soweto, that was one of the areas where the community in Soweto came out and said, no one is going to come and loot this mall. We buy from here, and we are seeing the consequences of shops that have been looted, because it now means that we're going to have to take a taxi and probably go and shop somewhere else, which is a distance from our homes. Did they miss the mark by not doing that, to say, in communities where clearly communities did stand up together and say there won't be looting here, might these posters have been received differently?
Well, Xoli, I think the issue is also the messaging itself. Whether in any community, once you start, touching on such raw, politically divisive issues of race and as well as economic disparity, because you will find in the Phoenix community, when I was reporting on there, what I did find was the fact that many of those who were victims of the attacks were people of color, and they were sort of, if you use the word migrant laborers, they come into the community and they do work, menial jobs sometimes, such as, gardening work, as well as some electrical work, stuff that is not necessarily full-time based, but it's based on their relationships with those in the communities. Now, to have those people being attacked based on race is something that is really, really very disturbing, because you find that the community would have known these people. It's not like there were strangers who were coming in, but because of what had happened in terms of businesses being attacked, it certainly raised the temperature. So the messaging certainly spoke to touch a nerve, and I think this was something maybe of a desperate attempt, or can be seen as a desperate attempt by the DA to try and capitalize on that fault line within these communities, and to try and gain votes, because we saw that a very strong turnout from senior government representations, as well as senior ANC members who went out into the community and then spoke of a message of reconciliation, saying that they'll get all the parties to talk together. So this might be something of a fight back, if one can look at it in retrospect.
William, as we conclude the discussion around the DA, of course, this will, in a way, focus the attention on this party, and in particular, the issues of race that have plagued it for some time. And you read, for example, in the Sunday Times that the DA mayoral candidate in Johannesburg was very clear that we actually are not going to be... I think she spoke at a personal level, saying that she distances herself from this kind of thing, and if anything, the leadership of the DA should actually apologize so that the party moves on from this. And it sounds as though the party at provincial level, all the provinces, they seemed to be agreed, and that's why Dean McPherson, who was the brains behind this, it would seem, was basically told, go and apologize and distance the party from this. Does this cast the spotlight into the DA, and in particular, might I add, the leaders who are black within that party, to say, This is putting us in a very uncomfortable position.
I mean, I think yes is the short answer to that question. I think what it's doing, though, is that it is a fairly deliberate attempt to kind of start to structure and try and tap into the anger and frustration of South Africans to say, you know, we've had enough with this. The police were nowhere to be seen. There was chaos and mayhem, and people stood up and they did something, whoever they were. And sure, maybe they crossed the line with a bit of vigilante action, but you know, really, this is a symbol of the failure of the state. And that kind of thinking, I think, has framed this kind of approach to this particular problem, you know, because you're trying to speak to people that kind of message resonates with, that to try and tap into that anger and that frustration with where things are within local government, within, you know, broader issues around security, etc., etc. And I think that what they didn't bank on, quite obviously, was the fact that people were going, well, hang on a minute, what you're doing is actually condoning overt racism about these things. And that's one of the issues that they're going to really continue to struggle with until they confront it in a way that is clearly and unambiguously that says this is not acceptable. So had they gone and said, you know, to every South African that decided not to loot, to every South African who stood up and took and respected the law and was not violent or something like that, you know, then you could have maybe started to believe that kind of a narrative around this, you know, but they didn't. The reality is they went with that message, I think, to try and tap into that anger and frustration, and it's backfired in a pretty damn spectacular way, and that's going to be quite damaging. Of course, the counter to that is that, you know, we're all talking about this. They're in the news, and if you're in politics these days, no news is, you know, there's no such thing as bad publicity. So this is just about then the way they spin it.
All right. Well, we shall see how it's going to end for them. But talking about the July unrest, a story that is closely linked to that, Tumaole, is on the front page of the Sunday World, and the headline goes, "Blame unrest on Xoli." And this is according to the police commissioner, Xoli, who has been served with a notice to suspend. Take us through very quickly before we go to a break, or maybe perhaps let's take a break because there's going to be much deeper discussions here between William and Tumaole. Let's take a break. When we return, we pick up on that particular story on the front page of the Sunday World. You're watching Politics Unscripted, the segment of the show, The Editor's Choice, where we discuss some of the stories contained in the front pages of the major Sunday papers. Let's come back to that story, Tumaole, on the Sunday World. And this is a story about the police commissioner who this week received a notice to suspend him from the president. And this is about a suspension related, or a suspension that is going to come related to the purchase of a certain listening device. It's called the Grabber. And this was apparently used during the ANC elective conference, which elected this very president to become the president of the ANC at that time. But on a completely different note, the commissioner, according to this report by the Sunday World, they say, and I just want to read here quickly, Sunday World can reveal that in his presentations or representations on why he should not be suspended, Stole told Ramaphosa that Xoli had failed to approve the police budget on time, leading to a poor response by the officers during the unrest that cost the economy 50 billion rand. Tit for tat between the two?
I think tit for tat, and it will be certainly very difficult, I think, for you know, the National Police Commissioner, Sithole, to back that up, because when one looks at the response, certainly in the initial breakout of violence in KZN specifically, I mean, there seemed to have been a void of any law enforcement at all. The usual, you know, even police, you know, patrols along the freeway, there was nothing. It's as if everyone just went to ground. It was very bizarre. And, you know, the police union even went so far at the time to say that it was an issue that had to relate with overtime and the payment of back pay that was due to their members, which is why their members effectively went on strike. But at such a critical point, Xoli, one has to ask certain questions why that would have happened. But, of course, Pop Crew did distance itself, saying that it condemns in the highest order that policing should not be there during such a critical time.
Yeah, William, say what you will, but might this revelation, if indeed the Sunday World is to be believed, as part of his defense as to why he should not be suspended, will it work in his favor? But a question also related to that, is this the right time to be suspending a police commissioner at a time when we are seeing civil unrest, if you like, and in particular the local government elections which are known to bring with them some kind of violence?
Well, look, we know about elections that as they approach, tensions increase. I guess that, there's probably never a good time to suspend your commissioner, but I think that the president's well within his rights to do so, and the big problem that they have is that we've seen systemic failures of our security forces in that violence towards the end of July. I don't think that you can put it forward any other real compelling argument maybe you can add to that and say that there was complicity in some aspects and there were labor-related issues, but you can't say clearly and unambiguously that there were systemic failures there. Even the minister said at the time that they were caught with their pants down. So, you've got to take action, and I guess if you're the president, you've got to be seen to be taking action, and certainly I think that again what this speaks to in relation to our media is the importance of being able to cover and look at security issues before we get to the absolute crisis point, which is what we saw in July. And those things were heated. Our media have been talking about security failures, how the security forces have been captured, etc., and yet we've seen no action. And that again comes down to a failure of many of our democratic systems, a failure by Parliament to do their jobs, significant failures by the various ministers.
Yeah. Tumaole, if we are to go by the judgment of January by Judge Norman Davis, who is also that court case quoted in this particular report, and there's a part where the judge says that Sithole, alongside his two deputies, Francina Vuma and Lebona Tumane, they had placed the interests of the ANC ahead of those of the country in procuring this grabber device. Might he survive this? I'm not so sure.
It's quite a damning statement, placing the interest of a party, albeit the ruling party, ahead of the interest of the nation. I mean, as a National Police Commissioner, he's supposed to be, non-partisan in terms of in terms of how he rolls out his duty, in terms of how he approaches his duty. He's not supposed to be influenced by any political party leaning. Yeah. And so this is something that will be very, very negative and weighing heavily against him in terms of the final outcome of that process. But it's quite interesting how this issue of procurement has been something of a poison chalice when it comes to
the police.
The police, especially the position of the commissioner of police, because we would remember a few years ago
it was Tele himself.
It was Tele himself over the procurement of a building or a lease issue that got him landed in hot water and eventually had him kicked out. Yes, kicked out of that position. Yeah. And so now he returns as minister, and again we find another commissioner with questions to answer to, and that he has to then oversee. I wonder how this will play out and when this will ever find its way to finality.
Well, William, to use the term, I think Tumaole used this term, back on the campaign trail, I'm not sure if that's the wording you used, Tumaole. Someone else that is on the front page of the Sunday World is our recent Minister of Health, Dr. Zwelini Mkhize, who's apparently on the comeback trail. That's actually the wording that's the word I was looking for. He's on the comeback trail because he was seen on Friday campaigning in Lower South Coast, that's in KZN, and this is someone whose wife on Friday, just this past Friday, was splashed all over I think it was the Daily Maverick site, and it's alleged that she received a sum of about 1.8 million, which would have been transferred to the Itala Bank. This is where she has a loan that was taken out on her farm. People will be asking the question, does the ANC not have any rules against this sort of thing? But then again, perhaps the response is going to be that, well, Mr. Mkhize does not have any court case or does not have any judgment against him that would prevent him from doing party political work.
You know, I mean, it beggars belief, frankly, you know, that in the middle of a global pandemic, you not only hand out corrupt tenders, but that, you know, you abuse public funds to that degree, and that there's basically seemingly no consequence to those actions, and that within a few short months you can then be back on the campaign trail, you know, and as a kind of a comeback, as though, you know, he was just defeated by some unfortunate misstep. You know, if you look at the SIU report, they suggest that charges should be leveled against him. Why have those charges not been leveled? I mean, that's the question that we need to be asked. That the reality is that it's the media that is continuously exposing these particular wrongdoings time and time again. And time again, we see that they say, oh, yes, we're very strong on these things. And then there's seemingly no action and no kind of consequence for these things, you know. And that's not just in the case of the former Minister of Health. It's in the case of so many of these issues. And it speaks to that issue that you raised just before that, which is that people put either their personal interests or the interests of the party well and above the interests of the public. And it's, you know, I guess the thing that's so frustrating for me on a personal level is that we see that again and again and again, these elections appear to be about the politicians and appear to be about the political parties, when in fact they aren't. They're meant to be about the people of South Africa, what we need as voters, what people in communities need as voters in their communities. We need libraries, we need safe spaces for our children, we need places where women can walk safely, not feel threatened, not be harassed, etc., etc. And yet it gets, you know, perverted to these issues around these kind of infights. This one's more corrupt than the other. This one's dirtier than the other, etc., etc. And then and as the public, we get left behind. And so I guess that for the media, the role there is to always make sure that we come back to the public as saying, well, where does this leave the public and what is the public interest in addressing these things? Because I think that on these issues, what we want is a commissioner of police that isn't corrupt, that is able to do his or her job to the best of their ability and restore some level of law and order. I think that seems a reasonable ask.
Yeah. Gentlemen, there's a story on page 10 of the City Press newspaper, and it's one that we would be doing ourselves an injustice if we don't highlight it, because it speaks directly to what William has just said, that this is about, at the end of the day, delivering services to the people. The headline goes, "Customer satisfaction is our drive." This is the proud contractor or constructor of the shoddy 15 million rand stadium scored another plum contract. This is the Talami Civils. This is the company which constructed the so-called stadium in the Enoch Mgijima local municipality. What a shame. Just that headline on its own. Is this really a company that prides itself on customer satisfaction?
Certainly, when it's looked at face value, even the pictures on the paper itself tell a story. And when you look at the amount of money that this company has been awarded in that particular municipality and area, and what you see in terms of what it has delivered or hasn't delivered, really, it speaks volumes, because when one thinks about upgrading or even delivering a facility that is meant to be something of a shining beacon in terms of service delivery, and you see a facility where there's absolutely no grass to speak of, and there's one little grandstand, and in terms of what was promised on paper, it was supposed to be something of a world-class facility whereby the community could use it for various things, including, of course, social sports and other activities, and that would be something of a beacon in terms of social cohesion and also developing that particular area.
William, I listened this week to a radio discussion, and it was a community leader from Mkhize who was speaking about, as Tumaole so beautifully says, that what was promised on paper is absolutely not what is the reality. And he speaks about how, from their calculations, only 3 million actually went into all of what you see in pictures, the visuals that the media would have brought you this past week. And the rest of that, well, we can all guess where it went. Surely this company has to be held to account. Its directors have to be held to account, including the officials within that municipality that they colluded with.
And I mean, I guess therein is the answer. You know, they say customer satisfaction is what drives them, and they're completely correct, because their customer isn't the community. Their customer is whichever political or official, public official gave them the tender. So you can bet that they are very, very satisfied. In fact, if you go and look, you can see that they probably went on a shopping spree deluxe over this particular instance, you know, and their customers are therefore very happy. To that extent, it speaks again to the same thing. It's like, whose interest is it when they decide to go in and put those issues there? So what we know we will rely on again will be our media to then go and say, well, hang on a minute, who actually benefited from this particular tender and where did the money actually go? It's that simple. They'll go and they'll find out where the money went. They find the satisfied customer and they'll find out just exactly what happened to the money that went there, because all of us know that the money certainly didn't go into that stadium. It certainly didn't go into the grass or any of the other issues there. I mean, I think that that's fair and clear and obvious. But again, it speaks to that particular relationship that says the customer here is not the people of that community or of any community. Those aren't their customers. They see their customers as whichever official is giving them that particular tender. And what you need to do to make that official happy is if you need to bribe them or give them holidays or unlimited shopping vouchers or car values or, you know, leases for their homes or whatever it may be, that's what you've got to do. And again, that's where there's this kind of perversity around what our elections are and what our democracy needs to be, is that it cannot be about the interests of the party or the politician. It has to be about the public interest.
William Bird, thank you so much for your input on this particular segment of the show. He is with Media Monitoring Africa, and my colleague here, senior reporter Tumaole Mohlaoli. Thank you very much for helping us dissect some of what is contained in these papers. And I can tell you that these are probably the stories that we are going to be following up on in the next week, including, we can't forget, talking about the Eastern Cape, Oscar Mabuyane. Who built that house? The renovations, 450,000. Where did that money come from? These are the questions, Mr. Premier, that you've got to respond to first before you go for Newzroom Afrika. Well,